40 feet beneath the intersection of State and Randolph Streets in downtown Chicago, there is a concrete room the size of a football field. It has platforms, it has walls. It has the bones of a train station that was supposed to change how an entire city moves. No train has ever entered it. No passenger has ever stood on those platforms. The lights are off. The tunnels dead end into raw earth. And the city of Chicago is still paying for it. That is what Block 37 actually is, once you look past them all above. The block known as 108 North State Street, bounded by Randolph, State, Washington, and Dearborn Streets in the Loop, has been called a gold-plated hole in the ground since 1996. More than $400 million has been spent on an underground shell that serves no transit function. A retail mall above it spent years at 70% vacancy. 4 successive development teams collapsed financially before a single building was finished. A 112-year-old Chicago landmark was stripped of its protected status and demolished to make this possible. And the man originally envisioned to design the towers, star architect Helmut Jahn, never saw his vision built. His blueprints died with the first developer. Welcome to Block 37. The block was cleared in October 1989 after Mayor Richard M. Daley approved its demolition. The original plan, drawn up by architect Helmut Jahn for developer FJV Venture, called for a 5-story shopping center anchored by 2 towers standing 30 and 50 stories tall. The city had paid $40 million to acquire the site and then sold it to FJV for $12.5 million, a $27.5 million loss before a single shovel broke ground. The pitch to Chicago was compelling. The Tribune reported in 1989 that developers projected Block 37 would generate $15 million annually in real estate taxes by the year 2000, plus $9 million a year in sales tax revenue. Once retail opened in 1992, the retail portion never opened in 1992, or in 1995, or in 2000. The block sat as a dirt lot nearly vacant for 16 consecutive years, from 1989 to 2005. 3 forces made this project possible, and then impossible, in almost the same motion. The first was political will without financial discipline. The city designated the North Loop a blighted commercial district in 1979, then set up Chicago's first Tax Increment Financing district in 1983. A mechanism that redirected future tax revenue away from schools and toward the redevelopment. TIF money subsidized the dream. It did not guarantee its survival. The second force was the real estate collapse of 1990. On the 12th of February 1990, the U.S. Comptroller of the Currency issued a national warning about non-performing real estate loans. Within months, real estate values nationally had deflated by 20 to 50%. Financing on Block 37 became, in the Tribune's own word, impossible. The third force was the underground ambition that no one could afford. City planners decided that if a retail hub was being built above ground, an airport express superstation should be built beneath it, connecting the Red Line and the Blue Line and offering direct service to O'Hare and Midway. The original cost estimate was $213 million, with the city and the CTA covering $172 million. There was no confirmed federal funding. There was no complete cost estimate for the full rail service. There was, as Chicago Magazine later noted, no plan beyond "if you build it, they will come." Block 37 was not bad luck. It was the logical product of a political system that confused ambition with planning. Here is what most people walking over that corner every day get wrong about the problem underneath them. Most people assume the failure is the mall. The mall is a symptom. The actual problem is 40 feet below their shoes, and it is more specific than it looks. The underground structure had to be threaded between 2 active CTA subway lines, the Red Line and the Blue Line, that run a single block apart, plus active freight tunnels, active utility tunnels, and a Commonwealth Edison vault that powers much of the loop. Think of it like trying to build a new basement beneath a hospital while the hospital is still running, without disturbing a single pipe or a single power line. Builders used a top-down construction method, building the structure from the roof downward while the ground above them remained in use. The station shell was poured in concrete, the platforms installed, the walls sealed. What the engineers could not build because there was never a committed funding source were the actual tracks, the electrical systems, and the tunnels connecting the superstation to either airport. The shell exists, the system does not. The concrete is doing its part. Everything that was supposed to come next never arrived. The cascade of failures at Block 37 follows a precise chronology. In 1990, financing collapsed, and the block entered 16 years of vacancy. FJV Venture, the original developer backed by a $24 million city subsidy, could not close financing and eventually surrendered the site back to the city. In 2003, the city sold the 7-acre site to Mills Corporation of Arlington, Virginia, at a loss of nearly $23 million from what Chicago had paid to take it back. Mills broke ground in 2005, but contractors were hesitant from the start, fearing they might not be compensated, given Mills' own prior financial difficulties. By 2006, delays were mounting. By 2008, the underground superstation costs had already overrun the original $213 million budget by $107 million, reaching $320 million spent on the station shell alone, with an additional $60 to $70 million. The CTA had been forced to absorb beyond its budgeted share. Mills was replaced by Joseph Freed and Associates, which owed $128.5 million on a $205 million construction loan and had accumulated cost overruns exceeding $34 million, according to a lawsuit filed in Cook County Circuit Court. On the 19th of October 2009, a Bank of America-led group of lenders moved to foreclose. Cook County Circuit Court Judge Margaret Ann Brennan issued a foreclosure ruling, finding Freed liable for $177.85 million owed to Bank of America and other banks. In March 2011, Block 37 was auctioned at a court-ordered sheriff's sale. Bank of America was the sole bidder. It paid $100 million, less than half the outstanding construction loan. The CTA formally scrapped the superstation project in 2010 after determining it lacked the estimated $1.5 billion needed to actually run trains through it. In the end, $400 million had been spent on the concrete shell, plus an additional $40 million in mothballing costs to keep the abandoned structure from deteriorating. The moment Block 37's underground failure became impossible to ignore came in June 2008, when the CTA board was publicly presented with an emergency bailout plan for the superstation's construction. Crane's Chicago Business reported that costs had already exceeded $320 million against an original $213 million budget. The Chicago Tribune documented the political fallout as city officials scrambled to explain how $107 million in overruns had accumulated with no authorized spending plan to cover them. The story broke open years of quiet financial maneuvering. When NBC5 Chicago later conducted an in-depth investigation descending into the underground structure itself, it found a massive concrete chamber with no tracks, no trains, and no timeline. The investigation concluded the structure had cost taxpayers more than $400 million and described it as a gigantic, unfinished, abandoned money pit. Retailers who had signed leases above, including Zara, Puma, and Ben Sherman, discovered in the years that followed that the Loop's newest mall would sit at roughly 70% vacancy. Joseph A. Freed, the developer whose firm took over from Mills Corporation, became the most visible human casualty of Block 37's second act. His company had accepted a $205 million construction loan and then ran out of money before the mall could fully open. By August 2009, Freed owed $128.5 million on that loan, with cost overruns exceeding $34 million, according to the Cook County Circuit Court filing. Freed argued in court that the lenders had reneged on a promise to restructure the loan and had blocked a reworked lease with an anchor movie theater. Judge Brennan disagreed. The Mills Corporation, which had broken ground and initiated the underground construction, was itself a company already marked by prior financial struggles before it ever touched Block 37. Golub & Company, contracted for the residential portion at a reduced profit margin, sued when that portion was reassigned to Freed. The city of Chicago, having sold the site at a $23 million loss and contributed tens of millions in TIF financing, watched its investment produce a mall that went into foreclosure before its first full year of operation was complete. Chicago's 2.7 million residents funded a tax increment financing district that redirected money away from public schools for decades in exchange for a superstation that was formally abandoned in 2010. A 2011 analysis by the Civic Federation estimated the total public cost of Block 37, including land acquisition, subsidies, TIF diversions, and underground construction, at over $500 million. The people who signed leases on the promise of a luxury retail destination in the heart of the Loop found themselves in a half-empty building with no transit below and no certainty above. The ones who could walk away did. Maybe the defenders of Block 37 have a point. The above-ground portion was eventually finished. The 3.8-story marquee residential tower at 25 West Randolph opened in 2016 with 690 units. An AMC dine-in theater opened in 2015. The mall functions. Chicago has been here before. In the 1880s, the first steel-framed skyscrapers rising in the Loop, the Home Insurance Building, the Rookery, the Monadnock, were called dangerous fantasies by engineers who had never seen a building held up by metal rather than masonry. Structural engineers predicted collapse. Insurers refused coverage. They were wrong. And what Chicago built in that decade became the template for every tall building constructed since. Maybe the underground superstation is simply waiting for its moment, for a federal infrastructure bill or a mayor with the will and the funding to finish what was started. Or maybe the lesson is darker than that. Maybe what Block 37 proves is that when a city builds the shell of a dream without securing the money to make it real, the concrete cures and the ambition does not. Tonight, beneath the corner of State and Randolph, the platforms are still there. The walls are intact, the tunnels end in mud, and somewhere in a federal grant agreement, a clause states that if that structure is never used for transportation, Washington has the right to take the money back. No one has tried to collect yet.